At Searchlight Digital, we work extensively with other website designers and developers to bring SEO expertise to their website projects. And this could look like a brand new website for a new business or a migration from an old website into a new. And there are often some surprising things behind the scenes that web developers and designers simply don't realize that they need to account for when they are building out their sites to make sure that the launch is also an SEO success in addition to being beautiful and functional. So, today I'm going to be going over some tips and tricks for website designers to make sure that the websites that you build are optimized for SEO in addition to being the beautiful works of art that you create. So, I'm going to start first with brand new sites. So, if this is a person who has never had a site previously, they don't have an old domain, maybe it's a brand new business, then these are some of the things that you're going to want to make sure are built in right from the start of while you're actually making these designs. We've also worked with quite a few designers who create templates, and these are also helpful things to make sure are built into your templates when you are creating these for your offerings. So the number one thing that we see in the number one area that we run into issues is around heading structure. So oftentimes, especially on website platforms like Squarespace, where you have global design settings where an H1 looks the same across the site, an H2 looks the same across the site. Oftentimes, designers won't realize that when they select an H1, 2, 3, or 4 from a design perspective, but that actually has a technical meaning behind it. So I always compare heading structure to being like nesting dolls. So every page should ideally have just one H1. And then within the H1, you then have H2s. H3s should only come nestled in underneath an H2. So just like the nesting dolls, they should all sit within each other. You would not want a website structure that goes H4 and then H1 then H2, and then three H3s and an H5. It's just all over the place and it's not organized. When Google and users are looking at this page, they're looking for a logical structure of information. And really, that's what your heading structure does. The H1 is the main topic of the page. H2s are subheadings of that main topic. H3s are subpoints to those subheadings, so on and so forth. So when you are designing pages, firstly, make sure that every page is designed with an H1 included. Ideally, this H1 should be something that can be edited. I've seen a lot of websites where the H1 is just the brand name or it's even up in the menu where every single page now has that same content as the primary header. Obviously, from an SEO perspective, this will be incredibly confusing for Google and the client will not be able to highlight what makes each page different. So you want to make sure that every page has a customizable H1 and that the subsequent headings are structured logically and nestled within each other. Another thing that we see that is missing often, especially for things like service based businesses, something that is very helpful for your clients is to have a thank you page built into their contact form. So when someone submits a contact form, there should be a thank you page that it redirects to because this allows for very easy conversion tracking. And if there's anyone down the road who is going to be helping them with digital marketing, even if they themselves are going to be running ads or doing any kind of marketing specifically paid, they're going to want to really make sure that they can have accurate and clear conversion tracking. So, making sure that you have a thank you page makes this much more straightforward for anybody to be able to track and measure. Another thing that I will often see missing in a website structure is a template for service pages. So, again, this is more specifically for service based businesses, but if you have a single page where all of the services are listed, this is not very strong from an SEO perspective. So if they have, 4 or 5 different services that they provide or areas of expertise, it's going to be very hard to rank for all of those different services if you only have 1 or 2 sentences highlighting each section. So ideally, what the website would also contain is the template page for services. And this will allow them to, be able to expand and grow as their business grows, to be able to highlight all of their niche offerings, which is very strong and competitive from an SEO perspective. Some of the behind the scenes things, and this seems to be a little hit and miss as to what people actually provide, but if you are selling an SEO optimized website, for each page, you should ensure that all of the images have image alt text. You should have optimized meta page titles and meta descriptions. The URLs and the URL structure should be clear. And ideally, upon launch, you should also have Google Analytics installed, as well as a Google Search Console. At this point as well, we do Bing Webmaster Tools and a sitemap generated and submitted. This again might feel a little advanced or outside of the scope of what most web designers and developers are offering, but I have worked with several clients who have purchased a website. They had a designer work on it, and then they come to us because, well, they've launched this new website and it's crickets. And ultimately, we discovered that a sitemap had not been automatically generated. It was not indexing in Google, and nobody knew because there was no Google Search Console or Google Analytics to be able to tell us. So it's an excellent service to your clients to be able to provide this information and have that baked in as a part of your packages. So those are some of the SEO foundations that are very helpful when you're building a brand new site. However, the majority of people that we work with are often migrating from a previous website onto a new. And this is something that I'm sure my fellow marketers know can be very beneficial, but it can also be extremely risky. And so I always warn in advance of anything, and any of these tips I'm about to share, bring in an SEO early and often. A lot of people come to us once the website's already built, after it's already been launched, and there are so many, small mistakes or tweaks or adjustments that could have been made very early in the process that were overlooked, and now it's a much bigger issue to have to clean up and to adjust post launch. So, when in doubt, bring in an SEO, talk to someone to make sure that any of the decisions that might seem really minor are accounted for and taken care of when making a migration and when making this change. So, one of the first things that I always like to say is to preserve as much as possible when you're making a big transition. So, there's several things that Google will look at and that are considered to be, really critical parts of a website. When Google is determining, is this something brand new or is this a continuation of the old? So these things could include the domain. So if they're changing their domain, that is a huge SEO implication. And so that needs to be tackled very carefully. If you are profoundly changing the design and therefore the text and the content that's included, that's a really big deal. That's something that Google, really takes into account. The functionality on the website, this often is an improvement when you're redesigning a website, but you want to make sure that you're not losing any substantial functionality when you're making these changes. And oftentimes, when you're switching platforms, so if you're, for example, switching from WordPress to Shopify or from Shopify to Squarespace, oftentimes the URL and the page structure will also be changing. So, lots of these things that I've listed do get changed in the process of a website migration and redesign. And so each of those has to be accounted for when you are making these kinds of changes. So if the current website has any kind of SEO optimization that has previously been done, so that includes usually the meta page titles, meta descriptions, any significant headers like the H1s, and even the content itself, the number of pages or the actual pages that are created, as much as possible, maintaining that and ensuring that that is copied and pasted over to the new website. That can be extremely helpful for sort of smoothing any potential bumps in the road that may occur when you're doing this type of migration. So, at an absolute minimum, the meta information, the metadata should be maintained from one site to another. If you are changing platforms or if you are updating the URL slugs, so that would be anything that comes after the slash, after the domain, you need to ensure that redirects are being placed so that there's no traffic lost and they're not having 404 errors when people are trying to come to their website and when Google is crawling that website. So this is something that can be done, of course, in advance. Redirects can be uploaded, but it's also something that should be tested right away after the website goes live. There's often, lots of sort of old little, URLs and pages here and there, some historical content. And it's really important to make sure that you minimize those 404s as much as possible. Another domain change that, again, is often overlooked but can have really huge implications from an SEO perspective is keeping the www or non www version of a website. So this prefix actually is registered as a different website in Google. So if the client currently has www in front of their domain, when you're moving that domain over to the new website, you have to make sure that you keep that www. Or inversely, if it does not have that www, don't add it. You want that domain to be kept as much the same as humanly possible. We have seen people's traffic truly fall off a cliff. The analytics gets all messed up. It's able to be redeemed, but this is something where your client is going to see a huge immediate impact to their website if you do not maintain and make sure that that WW or non WWW is kept across platforms for that domain. Another thing that I always ask people to do is to migrate that Google Analytics. So sometimes people will have Google Analytics set up on their previous website, but then no one moves it over to the new one. And this again can have huge impact if they are running any kind of ads, if they of course need or want to know their website's data, just making sure that that analytics code is moved over to the new website and that it is tracking correctly. That's a huge service to your client. On that then, and kind of as an extension of that, making sure that when you do this migration, that you have Google Search Console active and that you're able to resubmit the sitemap if there have been any changes. So specifically, if you do have any redirects, if you've changed URL structure, that's really important to make sure that you are registering those changes and that you can see very quickly if there has been any errors or any issues. Another thing that's often missed, and this is often a client-facing conversation, is when people are doing a website migration, clients will often take this as an opportunity to eliminate some of the pages on their website. They might say, we have, 20 service pages, we want to narrow it down to 2, or we had 100 blog posts, we'd really only like to bring over 10. This can have obviously a very dramatic SEO impact. And oftentimes people might not even realize what pages are driving traffic or impressions or conversions for their site. They might have an idea of which ones do, but sometimes they can have these pages that are ranking for really important keywords and not even realize it. So it's important to, where possible, review the Google Search Console data ahead of any elimination of pages to make sure that you are not inadvertently eliminating a major traffic source or something that is really supporting some of the other pages on that website. So websites should of course be looked at holistically. Having lots of blog posts or these individual service pages could be contributing to an increased authority and trustworthiness on the site. So paring down pages dramatically can have a really big implication on SEO. So where possible, we want to make sure that we are assessing and preserving the most important content on their site. And ultimately, once you hand over the keys, once you hand everything over to your clients, there's a couple things that you can do that, of course, will make it very helpful for them, as well as any future SEOs that are going to be working on their website. The first is to run a quick technical audit. And this is something that can be done through tools like SEMrush. We obviously use SE ranking. You can even use Lighthouse Report to make sure that there are no really major fundamental SEO errors that are happening on the site. And if there are, to be able to flag it for your client. Obviously, not everything is going to be in scope as a part of a website and development project, but at least if you can let them know and be able to provide some guidance on any further action needed, that will be super helpful for your clients, as well as providing looms or instructions on how to make basic updates to the site. For certain platforms like Squarespace or Shopify, this is relatively straightforward. But for things like WordPress, it can be very valuable to be able to show people where to potentially inject code. So if they need to do conversion tracking, or if they're doing ads or Google Analytics, where they can add that in. If there's anything that they should not touch that could potentially break the site, this is all really helpful to be able to hand that over to your client and any potential additional digital marketers who may be supporting them. So, this is sort of an overview of some of the most common issues and the common things that we run into as SEOs who often come in after the fact and want to make sure that websites are built with SEO in mind right from the beginning instead of as an afterthought. So I hope that this was helpful. If you or your clients need any SEO support pre or post migration, Searchlight Digital is here and happy to help.